Hi, everyone. I'm Miranda. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the LGBTQ plus Women's Program Officer here at the New Haven Pride Center. And I am so excited to be able to host this conversation with Leah Juliet, an amazing activist from our home state of Connecticut. But first off, I just wanted to welcome you all to night 3 of Trans Awareness Week, put together by the amazing trans, non-binary, and intersex program officer, Elliot Olson, who I am so excited to be able to have on this team. If you're interested in any of this talk or conversation, besides reaching out to me, you can also reach out to Elliot at trans@newhavenpridecenter.org. Elliot is absolutely fabulous, and we are so lucky to have this amazing human being on our team. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our star of the evening, Leah Juliet. Leah is an award-winning writer, speaker, organizer, and advocate from Connecticut. They're the founder and executive director of March Against Revenge Porn, a global digital advocacy nonprofit and political action campaign combating revenge porn through organizing, advocacy, and technology justice. Leah currently serves as Miss Greater Rockville within the Miss America organization and is believed to be the first openly non-binary title holder within the organization. Previously, Leah served as writer for Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, social media associate at Lesbians Who Tech and Allies, and youth engagement coordinator at GLAAD. Leah was recently named a L'Oreal Paris Woman of Worth honoree for their work with March Against Revenge Porn and has been awarded Glamour Magazine's 2018 College Woman of the Year, recipient of the Rising Star Award by GLAAD, and the Accelerating Acceptance Grant from Delta Airlines. Leah graduated from Western Connecticut State University in 2018 with an honors degree in political science, justice and law, gender studies, and conflict resolution, and is currently pursuing a master's degree at Prescott College. Welcome, Leah. It is such a pleasure to have you. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Miranda. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So first off, I just wanted to kick off the conversation and remind everyone that if you have any questions or comments, you can put it in the chat here on Facebook and on YouTube, and I'll be fielding those throughout the time. You can also, put your snaps in the chat and your claps and your positive energy, and I will funnel that back into this conversation. We love to see it. So first off, I'd like to ask you, what does Trans Identity and Trans Awareness Week mean to you?
It means so much. I'm a non-binary person. I came out as non-binary when I was 19 years old, so it's been about 4 years, and I've been a member of the LGBTQ plus community for about 10 years. But being a victim of sexual violence, which is something that we'll talk about further in the evening, I'm sure, visibility was something that was detrimental to my existence. Nude pictures of me were posted on the internet, and being visible, being openly who I was dangerous. But today, as an advocate, as an organizer, visibility is life-saving and it's life-affirming. So Trans Awareness Week, being recognized by politicians, community leaders, organizers from around the world, is so critical to the preservation of our lives and livelihoods. And it means so much to me that this week is being recognized by so many people, and I'm really honored to be here to be speaking to my personal experiences as a non-binary person, but also as an organizer around the subject of sexual violence.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That is such a beautiful way of putting that. And on top of that, so how do you approach working against sexual violence, specifically against revenge porn, through a trans and queer lens?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, when I first came out as a victim of revenge porn, I was 19 years old. And the conversation around the subject of revenge porn was so minimal to begin with. But the conversations that were happening were really just centering white cisgender women. And, 90% of victims of revenge porn are women, but the reason that we are only able to cite that gender-based statistic is because there's no studies on how trans people are affected, how non-binary people, gender non-conforming people, agender people are affected. So there's really an unfortunately low amount of research into how other gender identities are affected by revenge porn. So I take the subject of revenge porn through the lens of the trans and queer experience, through research, through advocacy, through, interviews and conversations and visibility. I try to amplify the voices of those who are marginalized as much as possible, because this crime disproportionately affects people in the trans and non-binary communities, as well as disproportionately affects LGB Americans as well. And that research has been cited by the I can't remember. It's on my website. You can visit marchagainstrevenge.org and you could check out that research. So we view things through the lens of diversity, because only focusing on a specific privileged group of individuals is really not seeing the scope of the problem. So that's how we approach it at March Against Revenge Porn.
Absolutely. I think it's just incredibly fortunate to have a leader like you, leading one of the foremost nonprofit organizations working against this form of sexual violence, be someone who is so openly queer and really taking this lens and approach to that work. So we're very fortunate to have you. And without further ado, the floor is yours, so to speak, to give your amazing presentation. I'm super excited to hear it. Again, anyone with questions, comments, thoughts, put it in the chat, and I'll be fielding those, and we'll circle back afterwards to have more of a dialogue on this. But Leah, it's all yours.
Awesome. So everyone, please bear with me because I usually give this presentation in the form of a PowerPoint. So I'm just going to be speaking it. And if you have any questions or would like to see the actual PowerPoint, you can send me an email at any time. It's leah@marchagainstrevengeporn.org, or you can contact me on social media and I'd be happy to send you the deck or as much information that I know that I didn't have the opportunity to cover tonight. So I want to start by really talking a deep dive into revenge porn, cyber sexual exploitation, and how that disproportionately impacts LGBTQ plus people. So to start, why that impacts me, I was 14 years old when nude pictures of me were first uploaded onto a global anonymous image board called AnonIB. Those pictures were distributed not only throughout my school, my hometown, and my state, but worldwide. And, I can talk about this now almost 10 years later. I'm 23 years old, so it's almost been 10 years. I could talk about this now in a much more a much more articulate way. But at the time, it was devastating to me. It still does devastate me. It, does prevent me from, getting employment as easily. It makes it incredibly difficult to maintain relationships because of the PTSD that comes from being a victim of cyber sexual exploitation. But at the end of the day, I didn't expect to live past the age of 18 because I didn't believe that A, I deserved to, because I believed that my victimization was my fault. And B, I didn't think that I could live with the wealth of shame that sat on my shoulders. So I, really pulled out of all of my school activities. I remained silent. I bit my tongue. I let it sink to my stomach. And I didn't tell anyone what was happening to me until I was 19, when my pictures were still online. So they were online for over 5 years. And they didn't finally get taken offline until the website was raided by the Dutch police for child pornography, and the website was taken down. So that was years later. I decided to become an advocate around the same time that I came out as being non-binary. And I don't think that those two things are, a coincidence. I truly think that finding my voice and finding my identity were, very, very much woven together. So I opened up my laptop one day and I saw the mugshot of the boy who'd posted my naked pictures. He was on the run for sexual assault of a minor. And in that moment, I realized that cyber violence and physical sexual violence are so intertwined that, that one leads directly to another. They're both a stone's throw away from one another. And that I was compelled to do something. At first, I blamed myself and I thought, perhaps if I had spoken out sooner about my personal victimization, this person would have been held accountable and wouldn't have gone on to hurt other people. But I hadn't, and I learned not to blame myself anymore. But I think it's a very normal thing to blame yourself for your own victimization. So I talk about that because so many victims of sexual violence do that, and it's not anything to be ashamed of. And so then I decided to take a stand. And eventually, a few months later, I started March Against Revenge Porn. And March Against Revenge Porn is an international digital advocacy nonprofit dedicated to combating revenge porn. It's the first of its kind in that it was started by a young, queer, non-binary victim of revenge porn. And it's mainly strategically it mainly strategically works to fight against revenge porn against other marginalized individuals and Americans who are living through this crime. There are other organizations like the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative and Badass who work to fight this crime. However, our organization centers the LGBTQ plus community, and I think that that's why it's so critical that we're doing this work right now, because LGBTQ plus youth, LGBTQ plus adults are disproportionately victimized by cyberbullying and sexual violence. So it makes sense that revenge porn is a form of cyberbullying and sexual violence, molded together. So I founded March Against Revenge Porn, and it was the first, the strategic method of advocacy that I utilized by founding it was a civil rights march. I learned as a political science student, I was fortunate enough to go to college for political science, that no big act of, social unrest is ever made successful without taking to the streets. We can't just, petition online. We have to actually have grassroots boots on the ground activism, because we need to bring a show of force to show people that our stories exist. We are here, we're loud, we're in the streets. And also because, like I was talking about before, visibility is so critical. Visibility becomes dangerous when you're a victim of a cyber sex crime. Visibility is the last thing that you want. So in order to take back your voice, reclaiming that visibility and using it as a strategic tool of activism is like the best thing that you could do. And so that's what we did by taking to the streets. We held our first protest march across the Brooklyn Bridge on April 1st, 2017. And we've held 4 other marches since in other major cities, and we're holding 3 in 2021. And since then, we've totally, exploded, and we do so many other things. We do victim support services where we offer non-legal advice to victims from around the world. We help connect them to lawyers, help connect them to advocates in their country or in their state, inform them of their legal options, things like that. We have a brand new legal defense fund, which is being funded by the award money that we received from L'Oreal Paris. And we're giving $500 mini grants to victims to start their legal defense journeys. We have a podcast called March Across America, where we're sharing the stories of victims of revenge porn, the diverse stories. So from around the country, we want to hear stories of how different people are impacted and how the legislative bias in each state works. We do media advocacy. So I've been able to speak on platforms like CNN and BBC and BuzzFeed all about this. So we do a variety of things, but at the center of what we talk about is we make sure that every time we bring up revenge porn, we're talking about how this impacts trans people, how this impacts lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer Americans, how this impacts undocumented people, Black and brown people, how this impacts people who society often does not consider, because when we think of a cyber sex crime, we often center white, cisgender women, straight women. And that's fundamentally unjust and unfair, because that population, while, they are certainly being victimized, they're not the only ones who are being victimized. So we need to make sure that we're viewing this from a diverse and necessary perspective for all people, to make sure that all people, receive the justice that they deserve. So I've been talking a lot about about revenge porn without really defining it. So revenge porn is the non-consensual distribution of sexualized images or videos, any type of media. A better word for it is non-consensual image sharing, cybersexual exploitation, or image abuse. Revenge porn is kind of a poor word to use because A, it implies that the victim did something that warrants revenge, which they did not. And B, it implies that nudity is inherently pornographic. Just because someone takes an image of me without clothing on does not automatically make that image pornography. And it's highly stigmatizes and victim blames the victim of this crime to turn their likeness into pornography. So that's what revenge porn is. And there's lots of types of image abuse, deep fakes, which are very popular. And the deep fakes can be used for a variety of purposes, but oftentimes they're used by putting the face of one person onto the body of another. So oftentimes the faces of random individuals are placed onto the bodies of sex workers. And so people who do not consent to being involved in sex work are then involved in sex work. And then those pictures are distributed. Hidden cams, meaning a camera can be placed in, a dressing room at a mall, for instance, and then those photos and videos can be distributed online. Sextortion, meaning someone can have photos of another person and threaten to disseminate them if they don't send a lump sum of money. Nude trading, which is what happened to me, where an individual will trade one photo for the photo of another, and nude photos are traded like trading cards. And then hacking, where an individual can hack into your computer and your camera and take photos and videos of you without your permission. So I think so often we think about revenge porn as being, so-and-so took a picture and sent it to their boyfriend, they broke up, and then the boyfriend posted the pictures online. And that does happen. That's similar to what happened to me. But there's so many other types of this abuse. And we need to make sure that we're looking at it through a wide lens, a diverse lens, because, it doesn't just happen in one specific way. As far as who this happens to, 17% of 17% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, according to the Center for Innovative Public Health Research, report being victimized by revenge porn, in comparison to only 2% of heterosexual people. So there's a huge, it's hugely disproportionate. And I apologize for my phone. I personally believe that it's because, the queer community is disproportionately victimized by sexual violence, and this is a form of sexual violence. And it's not folks in the queer community committing this crime against one another. It's folks who want to exploit, who want to out people, and who want to shame people for being queer. And the same thing happens to trans folks. Unfortunately, there's no research, although we at the March Against Revenge Porn are in the early stages of doing research to try to calculate how often this happens to trans and non-binary people. But we suspect that because it's a combination of sexual violence and cyberbullying, that it is it is occurring to trans people at a much higher rate than cis people. 90% of victims identify as female. And unfortunately, this research doesn't specify, whether or not that's cisgender, trans, or, what the gender variance is there. 61% of millennials report sending nude photos to one another. So this definitely does happen frequently within the ages of, I believe, 26 to 30 is like the widest age gap. But this happens to folks of all ages. I've spoken to people as young as 13 and as old as in their 60s. So this happens to people of all ages, and it shouldn't be written off as just something that happens to young people. And then 93% of victims report experiencing psychological trauma due to victimization. There's an incredibly high suicide rate among victims. So this isn't just a crime that occurs in cyberspace. This is a crime that's perpetuated in real life. And so that's why it needs to be combated with actual legislative justice that ensures that folks can get their images removed and take their lives back. So the reality of the fact is 4% of Americans have had a nude image posted online or threatened to be posted online without their permission. 4%, that's huge. And if 4% of Americans did anything, we would view it as, a huge statistic. But because it's this crime, which is so often stigmatized, we just sweep it under the carpet and say, this doesn't matter. These victims don't matter. This is just a small population, but it's a large subset of Americans. And this happens even more in other countries. March Against Revenge Porn, we do advocate for victims in all countries, but our work is primarily based in the United States. 1 in 10 young women under the age of 30 have been threatened by non-consensual image sharing, and this is data from the Data and Research Institute. And again, they unfortunately don't specify the gender variance of that. So this could be cis or trans people. 43% of revenge porn victims have had their computers or cameras hacked to retrieve nude images. So it's not just, image sharing among teens. A lot of it has to do with hacking and hidden cameras. So I definitely recommend, practicing cyber safety, meaning run scans on your computer frequently. Make sure you have a piece of tape or a sticker over your camera on your computer. Make sure that you're practicing safe internet use, so that way, this, you have less of likelihood of being exploited, although the burden should never be on the victim to avoid being victimized. But of course, these are just ways that you can remain safer online. This is also a form of human trafficking. There are documented cases of family members, intimate partners, and sex traffickers profiteering from distributing naked pictures of victims. And then sex traffickers also use images of victims that are nude to capture victims and trap them into the sex trade. And that is from the Typology of Modern Slavery, which is a human trafficking, the human trafficking booklet from the Polaris Project. So this is not only just a form of cyber violence, it's a form of physical violence and creates, a monstrosity of unsafety for victims. So I want to talk a little bit briefly about what's happened to me since coming out as, being a victim of revenge porn. And I will say that although my images were online and available online, and I was receiving, horribly misogynistic, patriarchal, transphobic, sexist comments from men on these image boards. It wasn't until after I came out as being a victim, a visibly queer victim, a non-binary victim, that I started to receive even more hate online. And I'm sure that that's no surprise for folks. We get, transphobic hate and, homophobic rhetoric on Twitter and, on Facebook and wherever all the time. But the comments on places like CNN, where they posted a video about the March Against Revenge Porn, these were comments mainly from women, were just, disgusting and deeply troubling. I received comments like, you're an idiot in the first place for taking the pictures. It's not revenge porn when you take the pictures of yourself. You're dumb, you're ugly, you're fat. You look, what gender are you? And what I really found was really interesting was the transphobic lens through which these comments came through. As soon as I turned into an advocate, as soon as I developed a heightened voice, it became a problem for me to have a shaved head. It became a problem for me to have short colored hair. It became a problem for me to have many tattoos, or, to have piercings or anything, to be vocally non-binary. It became a problem for these viewers to accept that what I had to say was serious. And I think that really displays the unfortunate lens through which society and people in general view the victimization of trans people. We know that trans people are, specifically Black trans women, are being brutalized and harmed and murdered every day in America. And it's absolutely tragic. And what's happening online to that same population is awful as well. And I think we need to talk about that, frequently as well, because this crime does lead to things like, self-harm and the degradation of the mental psyche and suicide. And it's so necessary for us to provide resources for all folks across the board, regardless of identity, but mainly focusing in on those who are marginalized and those who are disproportionately victimized by this crime. So that's kind of, I know that as someone, if I am, a non-binary person, but I'm white and I come from a place of immense privilege and I'm dealing with comments like these saying that, I deserved what happened to me. I can't imagine what other folks who perhaps don't have the same amount of privilege as me may be experiencing. And that's why through March Against Revenge Porn, we're trying to hand them the mic and have the amplification of all stories of victims of cyber sex crimes. So as far as legislation, in the last few minutes, I want to touch on that because I think it's important. I think for folks who may live in Connecticut and might want to know what their options are if they are being victimized by this crime, Connecticut has legislation called unlawful dissemination of an intimate image. It's a Class A misdemeanor and it's punishable by up to 1 year of imprisonment and a maximum of a $2,000 fine. So this is illegal in the state of Connecticut. It's not illegal federally, but we're pushing for legislation to criminalize it federally. Unfortunately, this law requires that the victim suffers harm as a result of the dissemination. So the burden does fall on the victim to prove that they suffered harm, which I think is unjust. But we're working to, get better legislation. We're working to amend legislation that's currently out there. I've specifically worked with the Sentencing Commission for the state of Connecticut to bring up the fact that, this language isn't inclusive of trans people. This language is very much cis-centric. And so we're working on it. Unfortunately, it's a slow process. But you do have options. If you are being victimized in the state of Connecticut, you do have a law on your side. And if you're anywhere else, I would say the first thing that I would recommend doing if you're being victimized right now is obtaining evidence, meaning take screenshots, record conversations of the perpetrator in your case, threatening to post your images, make sure that you take screenshots and capture the URLs at which your images are being uploaded. Just obtain as much evidence as possible, because if you do want to seek a legal route of obtaining justice, you want to make sure that those images you have proof of those images existing. And so just always know that you do have a path to justice, whether or not there's a law in your state. And we at the March Against Revenge Porn, myself personally, am always here, always on your side. When I was 14 and this happened to me, I really didn't see a life for myself beyond a short-lived life. But now, living as an advocate, living openly and freely in my sexual and gender identities, being open about who I am and what's happened to me has really given me the opportunity, given me a lot of privileged opportunities, and I want to help others as best I can. So if you have a personal issue that you want to talk about, that you can't ask a question in the chat about, you could just email me, Leah@marchagainstrevengeporn.org, or message me on my social media at Leah Juliett, and I'd be happy to talk you through it. At the end of the day, I'm 23 years old. I am self-educated in all of this advocacy, but I do think that I do think that just using our voices is the best thing that we can do for all of us to, spark social change in whatever avenue most impacts us and whatever we want to influence in our towns and in our states and in our country. So that's kind of an overview of what I do. You can view my website, leahjuliet.com, or marchagainstrevengeporn.org if you want more information. And I'd be happy to take any questions. But if the questions are more personal, you could just contact me personally and I'd be happy to respond. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that really powerful presentation. It was incredibly illuminating. So I'm going to give folks a couple of minutes to put their questions in the chat. And just before we dive in, I also want to point out that the New Haven Pride Center just launched its first survivor support group for all survivors of domestic and sexual violence and intimate partner violence. We're welcome to all experiences that you might have, people of all gender identities and backgrounds and ages. So definitely reach out to me or Director of Case Management, JC, if you have any questions about that and if you're interested in signing up. I'm a survivor myself, and so is JC, and we're both really excited to be able to host a survivor support group as a way of connecting with other folks in the community and kind of starting this healing process together. So I just wanted to point that out. And thank you so much, Leah, for your vulnerability here and for being such a strong, amazing person who's able to take such a traumatic experience and really do the work to make a difference in so many people's lives. And it's such an honor to kind of be hosting this conversation with you, especially as a survivor myself. And yeah, I just really admire your strength. I did have a question for you as we're waiting for some questions and comments to come in. You talked about the experience of it being sort of empowering to be visible and, really take to the streets and reclaiming that sense of visibility as a form of power. In your conversations with other survivors, how have you kind of navigated sometimes those fears and those challenges of overcoming that? How do you kind of encourage people to take part in this?
That's a great question. And the first thing that I would say is that taking to the streets is something that I'm personally empowered by, but not all victims and survivors are. In fact, it can be very dangerous for someone whose images are actively online to go out and have their face, perhaps be on the news or to be seen by a lot of folks in their city. That can be really dangerous. And so it's not for everyone. The first thing that I would say is that the folks who are able and willing to take to the streets, whether it be victims or allies. In our first march, it was so small. It was mainly me and my family, and I was the only victim there. Well, I was the only victim in my family, so all of my family members were showing up as allies, and there were several other victims there, and there were other folks there as well. But it was a very small group of us, and I just always would say, it doesn't matter how many folks show up in the streets because the visibility is what's echoing. 10 million people in the United States are victimized by revenge porn. So, I don't expect 10 million people to show up at a march, but if two victims are at a march who both feel comfortable and able and willing to march in the streets, and then 999,000 some odd people see it, that will spark, that visibility will certainly spark change and empower others in their own capacity with whatever empowerment means to them. So I think that the visibility that this sparks with whomever wants to participate is really important. As far as how I encourage people, I usually don't and try to encourage people to participate in marches if they don't feel comfortable, just because, like I said, it can be dangerous for some folks. But what I do say is get involved in other ways. If you want to talk on our podcast, you can speak anonymously. If you want to, have us share your story on our social media. If you want me to talk about your story, in some capacity, like in a media opportunity, like I'd be happy to do that. I think sharing your story is getting free. And if you can do that in any capacity, whether that's staying anonymous or having your face be plastered on billboards, do it in any way that you can. Start small, tell someone close to you, and then eventually, if you feel comfortable, you can tell more people, but you never have to. This doesn't have to be a thing if you don't want it to be. Not every person has to turn into an advocate, but if you feel comfortable, we have space for you and we welcome you and we want you here.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And as this whole thing has developed, what do you see as signs of progress? What are some of the success stories that you've noticed and found?
Yeah, well, there's currently 46 states in the United States that have victimized revenge porn. I believe when I started advocating in 2015, there were only like 38 states, maybe less. So I personally take no credit for doing that. That's a lot of work of other advocates and lawmakers and lawyers who are doing that, doing the legal work and getting those laws passed. But we actively lobby and we actively, try to encourage our legislators to pass these laws. So we really are from a more advocacy standpoint, but laws have passed in different states. And that is really encouraging to me. That shows me that people are hearing our stories and that they are turning their stigma into, progress and really changing their minds about what they think about, victim blaming and things like that. Other signs of progress are, that other folks are speaking out about this. I'm not the only advocate. I've never been the only advocate. There's been, women and other individuals who've spoken out since since like 2012 when Holly Jacobs first told her story. But now more and more people are speaking up and they're being covered by major news outlets. So that's huge. And it's just so exciting when people join our organization, when people want to tell their stories, when they come to me, for advice or to share their experiences. It just shows me that we now have more options than we did when I was 14. And that gives me hope because, at the end of the day, we just want to affirm and preserve the lives of all victims. And until we can get to a day where there's no victimization at all.
Absolutely. And my final question for you, before we wrap up and hand it over to Patrick, is what's an action that people can take today, tonight, next week, by the end of the month, that's really important to work for this cause?
So there's a few. The first is that we have a page on our website. Let me just find the exact link. It's marchagainstrevengeporn.org, and you can go to our Take Action tab, and it's the tab that is called Call on Congress. So it's marchagainstrevengeporn.org/call on Congress, and you can find your representative and use our script to call your congressperson and ask that they support federal legislation. It's really, really simple, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home. I know a lot of us are doing organizing calls right now around the election. So it's something that you can do if you're already doing that. Another really simple thing that you can do is, like Miranda said, I was recently recognized by L'Oreal Paris as a woman of worth, and L'Oreal is giving an additional $25,000 to whomever's organization, nonprofit, receives the most votes. And so you can vote at womenofworth.com. You can vote for any of the 10 nonprofits who are eligible, but if you feel so inclined, you could vote for March Against Revenge Porn, and we will be using the $25,000 to give $5,500 grants to people who are wanting to pursue legal justice but don't have money for the first consultation. So if you feel so inclined, go to womenofworth.com and you could just literally vote in a minute, and that'll help us push us towards getting the funding that we need to do our legal defense fund. So those are two really simple things that you can do. And the final thing would be to start talking about this issue in your life and in your community. It's so hyper stigmatized, but if we have a lot of folks who are talking about it, it becomes less stigmatized and less people feel afraid to tell their stories. And that's really what it's all about. So start talking about it and show up for people if they are being victimized and point them in my direction, leahjuliet.com or marchagainstrevengeporn.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that was absolutely fantastic. Any final words for us?
No, just thank you so much. Trans Awareness Week is so important, and I am honored to be recognized. I'm honored to be given this platform. I mean, by the New Haven Pride Center. I believe I got a scholarship in high school from the New Haven Pride Center for college. And so this feels like a really wonderful full circle moment. And I'm just very fortunate for this platform. I'm very fortunate for you reaching out, Miranda, and really excited to see all of the other programming that you have to come. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely keep in touch. And without further ado, Patrick, are you there to give our final?
I'm here.
Hello.
And for the first time when I've jumped in on these, I'm not muted. Thank you both for this incredible conversation. And you are right, you did get one of those scholarships back many years ago. I specifically looked it up to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But yes, so thank you everybody for being here. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm Patrick Dunn, Executive Director of the New Haven Pride Center. It's our honor to host conversations like this that are vital. I want to extend a thank you to Elliot Olson, our transgender, non-binary, and intersex program officer, who has put together this entire week, Trans Awareness Week, together in less than a month of employment with us. So I think that's pretty awesome. And if you do want to know more what's going on this week, you can visit newhavenpridecenter.org/TDOR. I'm here to just send a simple message that the New Haven Pride Center was recently recognized for a national grant of $25,000, which we are able to match. And we're hoping that by December 31st, we can match that to ensure that we continue to have programs like this, pay incredible LGBTQ plus speakers, and really continue to make a difference for our community. So if you have an extra $1, $2, $5 in your pocket, you can actually make it $2, $4, or $10 by going to newhavenpridecenter.org/match. Because every donation up to $25,000 is going to be matched 1-to-1. As we're doing this conversation today, November 18th, we've actually just raised over the first $10,000, which is, they say, the hardest part. So we're super excited to have reached that mark earlier today, and hope that you will continue to be generous. And again, I just want to say a big thank you to both of you for just being survivors that are willing to speak. As someone who knows loved ones, who has loved ones who have been victims, and as someone who's been personally victimized, it's a beautiful thing to see people who are able to tell their story for all of us who can't. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And with that, Miranda, I will give you the final word.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think on that note, I just want to send a big virtual hug out to all of the survivors who might be watching this right now. We all hear you and we believe you, and we're there for you. And your story and your experience matters and is valid. And no matter how you're feeling right now, I just hope you know that it will get better and that there's a whole community out there to support you. So thank you all for joining us. To any allies of this community also, thank you for joining us and learning what you can do to support us. And thanks again, Leah, for an amazing night. And